be chairing, I am the co-chair of the commission, and I will be chairing the meeting in Bill Dowdy's absence. Bill is traveling abroad. Petra, will you please call the roll, please?
Mr. Dowdy? Mr. Capelli?
Here.
Dr. Curran?
Here.
Mr. Farrell?
Here?
Ms. Hennessy?
Here.
Mr. Owen?
Here.
Ms. Kay?
Here.
Thank you. Now, if you'll notice that there's been a change to the agenda from the first agenda that was published. So I need a motion to accept the amended agenda which is adding
So
another
moved.
presentation to the agenda.
And I second.
All in favor?
Second.
All right, carried. Okay, next is, we're moving to approval of the minutes. We have 2 minutes that haven't been approved yet, February 8th and March 8th. And I'm asking for a motion to table the decision to approve the minutes because they are still not completed. And they, excuse me?
One set has, the other one is in progress. Just have not had enough time to get them to you in time to read it.
Okay, further explanation. But we still need a motion to table the approval of those 2 minutes until the next meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Approved. Okay, now we're public comments. These are the public comments on the agenda. Are there any public comments? Anybody sign up? Nobody signed up? Okay. Moving on. Old business. Kiwa update next. Kiwa next update and our comprehensive plan update. Now I call on our planning director, John Taylor, to give us those updates.
There's no substantial updates on our comprehensive plan. 2 things to note. We have a meeting next week scheduled with the Community Association, our project lead, to try to get Kika scheduled. You know, that's been one of the major stakeholders that we have not engaged with as far as that first wave of stakeholder sessions.
I missed you. Please.
I'm sorry.
Mic on?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. So we have had, I've had a meeting scheduled next week with the Community Association and our project lead, Blake. As you know, Kika has been one of the major stakeholders that we have not engaged in our initial session yet. And so what we want to do is get them scheduled. And so that meeting next week is kind of work out the wrinkles and sort of how do we engage with them. And so once we identify that, we'll be able to release that information. There has been just the next phase of the comprehensive plan will go into more of a data analytics. That's been a slight pause. The project team has actually lost 2 of their members. And so they've rehired. And so our original, if you guys remember, Abigail, who was with us on the tour at the beginning, she's actually going to be rejoining to kind of fill a major gap that they've had at the initial onset of this project team. And so we've had a small pause for a couple weeks, but we should be vamping right back up mid-April to get back into the data and analytics. So what that means is all of the reports and plans that we've produced over the last 3 years or better, they'll be doing a deep dive into those. And so that'll be reading census data, it'll be reading archival data, reports and plans that have been produced. And so that will be synthesized information that we'll be able to dive into. So that's the next phase, but no substantial updates today. So that's why I've added sort of our 2 presentations to kind of make sure that we still stay in rhythm.
One question, John, was it always the plan to wait this late to get Kika involved?
No, it was not this late. We've just been misfiring on a schedule alignment between staff and Kika board. Yeah.
Give us notice
Yes.
as far ahead as possible for those who might want to attend that
Sure.
session.
Yes.
Any other questions for John regarding the comprehensive plan?
John, who left the team?
So Blake is still with us. Their internal team. Yeah, Blake
That's
is still
good
with
enough.
us. Yeah.
As long as he's still here, that's fine.
Yeah.
What's the issue with Kika?
It's just been scheduled.
They just can't get around to providing
No, so it's
any
just
input?
no. It's just been difficult to align the schedules, and the other part of it was with internally with LS3P trying to schedule that. They've been more so focused on getting their team back up to 100% opposed to trying to like walk the dog, if you will, during that process. So now that they've kind of repaired and rehired, we want to move that forward.
John, was there also a structural issue whether they wanted to do it all together or separately? Was that, does my memory correct?
Originally, when I reached out to Shannon, I asked the community association what would be the best structure for them. And at the time, the idea was that we would meet with the chair of the board and allow the remaining members to submit comments in writing that the board would be able to, the chairman would be able to read and submit as a whole. I'm not sure if that's the same structure today of what will occur, but part of that delay is just identifying, do we meet with all of those board members individually? Do we meet with a subgroup? And so that's just been part of the equation, trying to narrow that down.
John, is the survey still open? Are we still getting surveys in?
Yes, the survey is still open. That will remain open throughout the entire project. What we've agreed to with our consultant team to allow that to be open. And so as things come online and folks feel that they might want to add something else, they can submit comments, but we will continue to keep that open. And I should have pulled that data, but we've had well over, I think, the last time I checked, 400 to 500 respondents. So it's really good participation in the survey.
Will the delay impact our project completion date?
I asked Blake that question, he says no. So the next part is actually where they will bring in, as you all remember, the RFP respondent has two consultant teams, not two consultant teams, but two components in it. So Kimberly Horn, who is the other party to the RFP, they are already sort of familiar doing a lot of the traffic work and engineering data that will, so they will be they've already somewhat begin reviewing some of that traffic data. They'll be able to full speed ahead. So the short answer is it won't impact our schedule significantly, but it may impact just based on when we present our initial recommendations. But as far as our phasing, we're still on schedule with be in April and May to start the next phases. Yeah.
One additional question on traffic. What role does the proposed, very tentative, purchase of the real estate office at the intersection of Beachwalker and our Parkway, what impact might that have?
To the comprehensive plan?
Yeah, to the traffic piece of the comprehensive plan.
So right now, and I would say that that's an independent project. So I would treat the intersection as an independent project. We will always capture what is, as far as the traffic, what's in our traffic recommendation strategies and goals to say what's the best interest of entering the island. I don't think that was substantial change from what's in the plan today when we look at our goals. I think holistically, the idea is really to protect the entrance to Kiowa from a traffic standpoint, right? And so whatever's best solution that is diverged from whether or not that building is part of the equation or not, that's what we want to focus on. So I would say today that that's an independent thing that we need to focus on. And council has been really driven to focus on that. And I think that would be a priority, whether it happens before we adopt a plan as far as what might come out of it, but the action probably won't happen until after the plan is adopted. So we can always pivot accordingly.
I just wanted you to said that, we're still on target for making recommendations. Are we going to have subgroups to talk through the consultant so that we all agree on what recommendations and how this should be done before it's presented?
Most definitely, yeah.
Just a point, John, we may not all agree, but we majority should agree.
Well, but that we have the opportunity before the consultants say, here's what we recommend for us to say.
That's the important point.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions for John on the comprehensive plan? Okay, with that, we'll move on to new business. We've got two presentations, and I will ask John to introduce our guests today.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. As I stated sort of a minute ago, in meetings that traditionally sort of that we didn't have any applications for your consideration to vote on. I try to take advantage to bring in guests. And so I reached out to a familiar face who's left us but is still with us. Lucas Hernandez, Lee Bundrick, you all familiar with Conservancy. Lucas used to be an employee of Community Association. A lot of the legwork that was done in our initial resiliency efforts with the town through the flood mitigation, sea level rise, Lucas was a substantial component to all of that work. He's moved on to the private sector, but is still working diligently to support Kiowa in a number of ways. They have been contracted with the Conservancy to demonstrate rain garden on the island. And so I thought would be good for you guys to hear what that looks like. As those who are part of our marsh management work group are aware, we're looking at different ways that could benefit the island from stormwater management, from green infrastructure, a lot of different ways. And so this is one of those sort of green solutions of a rain garden. And so these two areas, or is it two areas that will be demonstrations for residents, property owners to kind of see what is a rain garden, what has it done, what does it do, how can this impact my property, add greater value. And so this gives you guys the opportunity to ask questions and then educate others and saying this is a benefit to Kiowa, primarily by hearing directly from the folks and experts in this arena. So I'll turn it over to Lee, Lucas, whoever.
Let's see. All right. Does everybody have the presentation on their screen? You can see? All right, cool. Well, thank you for allowing us to talk with you today. We're really excited about the rain garden project with the town. So here we're going to be talking today about our work with Weston and Sampson and the Conservancy to put in several model rain garden projects around Kiowa Island, and mostly just to be able to highlight different types of green infrastructure practices that sort of help resolve some issues within the community, but also not only just with the human aspect, but also the wildlife aspect. So I think this is a good marriage between the two. And to kind of give a quick primer about what kind of we're focused on. So a lot of the drainage projects, a lot of the infrastructure that's traditionally been kind of put in for handling drainage, rainfall, stormwater runoff, has been focused on gray infrastructure, which has been mostly focused on trying to move water as fast as we can away from a lot towards downstream areas. And the idea is to manage these large volumes of water. As you can see, there's the definitions from the EPA and some federal sources. But our focus is to try to figure out how we can mitigate stormwater in different alternative ways. And one of the alternatives is using green infrastructure, which is sort of taking advantage of the natural soils, the plants, the nature around us to help with storage, infiltration, and sort of the reduction in flood risk on the island. So essentially it's just the use of the natural resources around us to handle stormwater in a different way. And a lot of this is focused on a lot of federal government work, state work, and certainly some work in the region. And there's different types of green infrastructure projects that are available throughout the nation in different ways. You have things like being able to harvest rainwater, being able to control it through rain gardens, bioswales, even the urban tree canopy that you see in downtown Charleston and on Kiowa Island is one of those types of green infrastructure that does help out. But one of the focuses that we really wanted to kind of find things on Kiowa Island that sort of fit within the mold of what our community would like to see in terms of green infrastructure that would help fit on the island. And mostly looking at ways we can protect the marshes as well as mitigate stormwater runoff. And the whole concept behind this is that a lot of the stormwater we have on the island ends up in our marshes. So there's this nexus, this continuity between the two, trying to figure out how we can put in these green infrastructure projects to protect as much natural environment as we have. Through work between Lucas and I, we put together the Nature-Based Solutions Manual for Kiowa Island, which highlights 13 different practices for the island, and kind of has a list of things that you can do from site selection all the way down to the maintenance of it when you put it in. Yes, sir.
I have a question. Why is Downspout disconnecting a water mitigation recommendation?
So instead of focusing on channeling water all to one point, it focuses on distributing it throughout an entire area so it can infiltrate into the ground better. Yes, ma'am?
The manual that's pictured here, where is it housed and how is it distributed?
So it is housed in the Conservancy electronically, and we also have copies of the document in case you need it. So, and yeah.
And people working on the tree ordinance have it.
Okay, all right.
But, you know, this was a two-year project, basically. We were trying to identify all these different projects, and downspout disconnection's not in there. It could be later on, but it includes things like using bioswales, talking about living shorelines, and in particular, it focuses pretty heavily on rain gardens. And rain gardens are a pretty simple solution to a flood problem. And depending on the area, it helps with trying to mitigate stormwater flooding. Oh, wait.
When we
Does
got to
everybody
do
have a
this
copy?
meeting.
But essentially, you know, the US EPA defines it in a pretty concise way: a depressed area in the landscape that collects rainwater from a roof, driveway, or street and allows it to soak into the ground. Previous discussions with the town back in 2019 were worried about groundwater and how saltwater intrusion is going to affect it. So this is one of those ways we can not only help mitigate stormwater flooding, but also help recharge our freshwater groundwater reserves for the betterment of the natural habitat and wildlife on the island. And this is kind of a simple diagram of that, kind of how it works. Sort of stormwater flows into the garden. It's allowed to infiltrate, support the plant life in there, go into the ground. And then, you know, if you have a large storm event, then some of the excess will kind of run downstream and flow off. But the idea is to trap enough stormwater that it help mitigate some issues downstream with the amount of volume that you have. And there's a lot of benefits that you get from rain gardens. Of course, we're a lot of talk about flood reduction, but there's also erosion control. It acts as a way to remove pollutants from impervious surfaces, so it allows it to trap there and infiltrate and get broken down by the soil and the plants. It also helps with wildlife habitat and diversity, especially if you put in native plants, which is our focus. And it adds into the aesthetic appeal. It helps recharge the groundwater, which is important on barrier islands. And one of the things that could be a talking point within the community is that it also is incorporated within FEMA's community rating system. If you have a certain amount of green infrastructure projects like rain gardens, you can actually improve your credits and have reductions in your flood insurance premiums for an entire community, up to 5% for every 500 points you get. So that's some of the benefits that you get from rain gardens. And not only are they some of these environmental benefits, but some monetary benefits, financial, and some tangible things like having a pretty garden in your landscape. So the idea with our project with the town, so we received funding for the current fiscal year. And the idea was that we would have these kind of model demonstration gardens to provide tangible kind of things that people can look at and see how they work. And then kind of be able to showcase them, whether it be the Conservancy does sort of a workshop group or something like that, which we would put on to kind of show on how the gardens are installed, how you maintain them, and generally like how do you reach out to contractors to get this done. So we would have this as a resource for property owners and contractors to be able to look and see how they look like when they're put in, but also have us give us the opportunity to discuss how the process works and how we can help out. And generally, we just wanted just to be an opportunity to showcase how not only can you put in native plants, but how can you use this as a function in your landscape to help reduce potential flooding issues that you may have on your property, and sort of help with the landscaping on the island for wildlife. And I think that's good, and I think I'll turn this over to Lucas to talk about our rain garden locations.
Lee, excuse me, before you let Lucas get back on, and question about, well, if you're going to put these rain gardens throughout the island, or the goal would be to put them throughout, what, what, what concern do you have, if any, about the ponding of water over time, the difficulty in drainage, and presumably the safety of the community with respect to various diseases from the ponding, including encephalitis and everything else from mosquitoes? And what are we suggesting there?
So the idea behind rain gardens is to not allow water to sit for more than 24 hours. So when you build in a rain garden, you dig in a depression and you put in soils that allow for the infiltration to happen very quickly. So you usually mix it in with sand so that when water goes into there, the idea, the objective is for it to sink in within 12 hours. So, you would put in things like organic matter to allow plants to kind of live in these areas, but the actual internal part of the rain garden is mostly coarse sand, so it just sinks down really fast. So the idea is not to allow ponding, but allow for the infiltration into the ground instead of out.
Now, I can validate that they built a house next door with the rain garden. I was a little concerned at first because they were building it up. I thought all the water was gonna run onto my property. But they built a rain garden, and after a big rain, the water disappears in whatever time frame you said it. So I would say it seems to be working next door to me.
Yeah, and we did have an example next to the Conservancy office. We had a place where it ponded water pretty frequently. It would stay there for like 2 weeks. We put in a small rain garden, and it doesn't hold water for more than an hour. So it works pretty well. But does anybody have any other questions before I hand it over to Lucas? All right, thank you.
Thank you. So also to that same question you asked Andy, when we chose these sites for the rain gardens, we wanted to make sure that both were going to be visible to the public, but also function properly. So another factor that goes into this is looking at the soil type and performing a percolation test before you're actually able to go in and determine that that site is actually suitable for a rain garden. So the two locations that we've chosen, one being right outside of Town Hall on this walk path over here, and the other being at Rhett's Bluff, both have highly permeable soils as is, so there's going to be less of a requirement for soil amendments, and the greatest benefit that we're going to get in reduction of stormwater and functionality of the system themselves. So this map here again, that's your overview of where the two project locations are. Here's more of a close-up of the location for the site at Town Hall. So we came out, I guess that would have been about a month ago, and visited with a couple of the town staff, talked through irrigation. We spoke about, we received the as-built for Town Hall. We talked to Brian Gottschalk about maintenance for the facility and the ability to go ahead and put the plantings in and make sure that they're going to have a chance to establish. So we felt that this would be a really great site. It's highly visible for folks coming into Town Hall, and there's a great chance for success right at this location. I think the next one, we've got the actual designs. So what you're seeing here are the conceptuals for the rain garden that will be placed at Town Hall. You can see that sort of kidney bean shape that we try to go after for the rain gardens. And I've got up there a plant list with some additional plantings. What we've tried to do here as well is we knew at the beginning of the project that that we wanted property owners to look at these as a viable source to manage stormwater on their own properties. So what we wanted to give is a variety of planting types. So this is essentially our sunned garden, if you will. This area receives a lot more sunlight than the location in Rhett's Bluff, so the plantings reflect that. And then also we have sort of a spillover area that's sort of outlined. I wish I could point, but there is a spillover area in the bottom right-hand corner of the conceptual on your right, where any amount of water that reaches the top of the berm that'll be surrounding the rain garden will be able to escape and go out into the existing wetland in the area.
Just a question, are all these plants native?
They are. We made sure that we got a list from the Conservancy so that all plants would be native. And we've added this section there that says additional plantings because we wanted to push some more evergreen plantings that would stay, beautiful throughout the year as well.
And they're deer-proof.
We're going to try and make it deer-proof.
So
We
is this
did-
a low area that ponds currently, or why did you select this location?
So this location was selected number one for its visibility. But number two, if you go out there and after this meeting, if you go out there, you can see that there's an existing, a lot of erosions happening in that location. So all of the runoff from the roof and from this paved area is making its way into that wetland that you can see there in the green. And it's causing erosion on the side. So we're hoping to put this garden in, and then, there's the ability to put signage to show what this is talking about. We've discussed that as well. And even having it be maybe sort of the starting piece for the nature trail for the town as well. But that's why that site was selected.
Thank you.
Now, the second area here is going to be a little more difficult for you to see, but it is in Rhetz Bluff Boat Landing. This area is actually known to flood now. So there's actually a connection through that tree line forested area there to an existing inlet on Rhetz Bluff Road. And that inlet regularly backs up. I believe Kika's got a project going on right now or starting the phases of moving in a project to fix some of the drainage in that area to channelize it a little bit more. So we've been coordinating with Kika for both of these locations. We made sure that we were involving the town and the community association to help with the site selection. This one I'm pretty excited about because I think it also has the ability to maybe be built into any future drainage improvements that Kika decides to put in. But with the new paved area that was installed to the boat landing, we've used that as the impervious area that we're going to mitigate runoff from. So this again is more of that shaded garden. And at the very bottom, I guess it would be the right-hand side is where we're going to have a spillover to go into the forested area. That's the location that Kika had requested that we look at because they are thinking of channelizing down in that forested area. So anything that would spill over from this would be able to move down into the existing drainage system.
So I'm new to the commission, but help me understand the thought process around spending public money on private land to do this.
So this location ended up being one of about 5 that we had looked at. And we wanted one that was going to be outside of the island and publicly viewable, but we also wanted one that would solve an existing problem and one that would also be visible. So we found that Rhetz Bluff location had the traffic, it has the walkway in there, and it also has folks using the actual facility. So we ended up ultimately choosing this over another location by Arrowhead Hall, where the rain garden would not have functioned properly. And I feel like the other location was on a private residence, but obviously we couldn't move forward with that one either. It was more of a complex.
So let me restate the question then. Is this money from the Conservancy that you're spending to build these? Okay, so it's not town money that you're using.
You want to answer that one?
Yeah, so great question. So, talking with the town staff about how we could use the funds, we recognize that we can't use funds from the town to directly install the garden, so we can't hire a contractor to actually install everything, but we can at least buy the materials to install at that site. So our intent is to not use town funds to do the installation, but at least be able to get the designs and the materials related to the project, and then we would spend Conservancy money to install the garden, at least at this site.
Seems like a little bit of a distraction from a good idea to put a restriction on the planting, but yet they'll allow you to buy the material and run the project using Conservancy money. We're not talking about the town money. and for some reason you can't do the planting, but have to go out and hire someone else to do it?
So, and John, help me if I mess up, but I think if we do a project on private property, then it has to be made public. And I think using public funds for private property improvements is
Well, I
discouraged.
understand
Yeah.
that from the town standpoint behind the gate, on everything behind the gate. But with the Conservancy, are you limited as well behind the gate?
No, we are not.
I mean, you have lots that have been deeded to the Conservancy that you take care of. You plant there and you don't plant necessarily a lot, but you do plant when needed.
I just wanted to clarify, so the overall goal to know is not a specific town project, right? It's a Conservancy-led project. But we've partnered with the Conservancy on a number of initiatives through the years, more so from a position to better understand, from an environmental standpoint, different nuances. And so this is just one of those things that fall into that bucket. If you're aware, the town has utilized the Conservancy, or has funded the Conservancy rather, for a number of initiatives in the past, so the groundwater study and some of those other initiatives. So this is no different from a study being conducted where those funds would be able to be used. What Lee's trying to communicate here is that the town isn't spending its dollars directly behind the gates, which would, to your question, I think will jeopardize we don't think that is the case. But I mean, the idea here is, I don't want us to go into this spin here about the actual public-private addressing that here in this discussion here, but more so focus on the actual project. I don't know if that answers the question.
I guess we could take this offline. I'm happy to. I'd probably like to talk to Joe Wilson, but it still seems like we're either making a donation to the Conservancy, we're making a donation to Kiowa, or we're spending town money on private property. And I don't know. I'm not an expert on this, but I'd like to just investigate that a little bit further.
So last year, town council did approve for $73,000 for the Conservancy for projects, and a portion of this was used for the rain garden. So this is directly related to that.
So if it's used out of the original donation, which I know the town can do, and it makes me feel a little bit more comfortable. But
Yeah, and we set it up in a way that we would be reimbursed after we did the costs. So we want to make sure that we get everything in before we ask money from the town. So you had a.
Do you have educational signage at these locations?
Yes, sir. So once we get the gardens finished, we're going to work with our communication staff and our geospatial staff to make sure we get some signage in there. And we've received kind of similar signage from Kim Organello at Clemson Extension, which we have a smaller version of our office, but I think a little bit bigger, depending on what the town would like to see. So, yes.
And just don't misunderstand me. I think have a demonstration plots makes sense. Have a place that's visible to the public to see their benefits and their beauty makes sense. Mine's just how do we accomplish it without violating some kind of transfer of funds issue is my concern.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lee, I'm not concerned about the overall transfer, as much as I am the ongoing cost, the maintenance cost, as well as, well, maybe the supervision, but I don't see that as a big issue either. Of course, it's coming from the Conservancy. You're not using town people or town resources to do that. What though bothers me is, once you're in there, why, and I heard John's answer, I still don't understand what the difference is between the idea of designing it, buying the materials, and then planting.
We can talk about that. We can address that offline.
Okay?
So what you're looking at now are the materials that will be involved as part of the construction of those rain gardens. You can see the Retz Bluff area over there. We've got a darker green shade and a lighter green, so that's just showing you all the two different elevations within that garden. We're going to have sort of a deeper section there to allow water to pool, and then a more elevated section to vary the plantings, at least for the Reds Bluff. So cotton burr, cedar mulch, egg rock, you can see on the further right-hand side, that's how they will be layered, and then a rough sketch of how those, the berms that will keep water from overtopping on those light gray sections will be constructed as well. So we've got a tentative completion schedule here. This month, we're hoping to finalize our plant lists and planting orders for the rain gardens. We're finished up the engineered drawings and our conceptual drawings that you saw here today. So we're hoping to finalize both of those for the Conservancy. And then we're hoping to get the proper permissions from the town, KICA, and the ARB for these installations. We have been in contact with both the town and the communication, or the community association throughout the entirety of this project so far, so they are very much aware. We'll be sending them a timeline soon as well, once we pin it down with the Conservancy this coming week. In May, we're hoping to start advertising this to property owners and to contractors so that they can both be a part of the rain garden workshops that you see up there. As part of the project, we will be hosting 2 different workshops. At the current moment, we're thinking one of them will be geared more toward property owners, and the other will be geared more toward the contractors that normally work on the island. And I think we've tossed around some ideas about how to incentivize that as well. Maybe even create a list of recommended contractors to do this type of work for property owners. We're also going to be going through and doing a utility locate in both locations. Again, we do have the as-built already, but of course we want to go ahead and get the utilities located and do some potholing before we go in and start prepping the site. And what that site preparation will look like is just going ahead and moving the soil, creating that depression for the rain garden, and getting everything set up so that after the workshops, we're able to take the participants outside and have them actually help with the installation. So there will be sort of a classroom component and a component where people are actually going to have the experience of installing one of these on their own. And so the following month in June is when we're planning on wrapping up the work for this project. And what we're hoping to deliver to the Conservancy is something that they'll be able to tangibly hand out to property owners who are interested in this, including these conceptual designs so that everyone has a rough idea of what a rain garden should look like, some information on how to properly site where they go, an overview of the process that we went through as part of getting these permitted to be installed, and then a list of possible plantings as well. And that would be distributed to all property owners. So as we're moving forward, I'm sure we'll be in contact with the town and with the community association to coordinate the advertisement of these workshops in the coming month. Sure.
I think this sounds terrific. Lee, I think as part of the marsh management work group, it will be incumbent upon people like you and me and Andy to link this all together so that our efforts are collaborative and that somebody going to either place to look for direction, guidance, how-tos is going to get the same information. And this is one of those projects we talked about highlighting and incentivizing, and this could be a perfect opportunity. Plus, you've got this very short time frame that we're working in so that we can make something on the publicity side move forward pretty quickly. Question about utility for those individual property owners who are fortunate enough to not have a flooding issue on their property. Is there utility for these gardens for people like that?
I think so. You know, the idea is that if flooding is not an issue on their property, it could be downstream. So, you know, the idea is that you're trying to mitigate flooding everywhere. So if it's not on your property or not on your neighbors, but it could be the pond across the street, or it could be down the road where somebody has flooding issues on their property. So the idea is that you mitigate problems happening on your lot or your neighbor's lot or somewhere else downstream. And the idea is that you're providing that function to the community. So if you don't have problems on your lot, you could potentially be solving somebody else's issues. It just depends.
So in terms of any benefit that comes through FEMA, for instance, or any kind of publicity for the community, it would still be workable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, well, I would like to thank Lee and Lucas and appreciate the update and look forward to visiting the water gardens.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Larry, one question for Lucas.
Yes.
Putting on your other hat, before you left behind a flood management plan. Based on what you've seen, what you've heard, are you aware of anything that needs to be changed in that or adjusted or? It seems to be working from my perspective, but I'm not the expert.
I think that Kika has done a really great job with going in, contracting out Stantec to get the modeling done to set up those projects. From what I've heard, everything has been going very well, getting the installs done. I was here for the installation of the new outfall where the old fire station used to be. And I think they've had a great success there. So as far as I'm aware, I think everything has been going well for them with the management project.
That promotional opportunity was given to you by Andy. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Now we're going to hear about the urban growth boundary, and John Taylor will present.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Our second sort of presentation today, the urban growth boundary. I thought it'd be helpful as this is another initiative that we'll be undertaking with the town. Just to give it an overall sort of a history or some background knowledge here. The town has, and Kiowa has utilized our development agreement as our primary growth management strategy since its existence. You know, Kiowa was developed through a planned development under Charleston County years ago. And since then, the development agreements took priority to how we developed on Kiowa. We all are aware that at the end of this year, one of those development agreements is set to sunset. And 2 years ago, one of the planning initiatives that I presented to the council was that we need to begin to look more intently at what happens the term beyond the gates. And so the areas that are in our front door, the greater areas around Freshfields, Bessie Carson Parkway, that are essentially the entryway to Kiowa, and how that area is being developed more so than what's actually on the island and how what's being developed on the island. And the reason being is because we have been able to sort of manage over time the amount of density that's on this, that could have been built on Kiowa has not been built on Kiowa by decisions made over time based on the development agreement. But beyond our control, the areas in unincorporated Charleston County, we have sort of less teeth to control those things. And so one of the things to do is to be able to see what can we reach outside of Kiowa to do more regional collaborative efforts in planning. And so one of those is utilizing the urban growth boundary, which is a planning tool. It's used across the country, but more specifically in Charleston County, it's the primary tool of growth management for our region. And so as we look sort of beyond the gates, if you will, introducing a concept of how do we, the town, utilize the the urban growth boundary to our advantage is one thing that I want the town to explore. And so this is a list of just different growth management toolkits, planning tools. Our zoning code, as you all know, when we look at our comprehensive plan, we know that the zoning ordinance is our primarily sort of tool that we use to enforce or to achieve the goals that are outlined in our comprehensive plan, but it's not the only one that can be used. And so these are a list. I won't go through all of these and what all of these entail, but some of these you may be already familiar with. Overlay zoning districts, we have a couple here on Kiowa already, but those allow for flexibility to lay on top of overlay existing the foundational base zoning districts, which provides an additional layer of protection for a number of different reasons. It can be for traffic mitigation, it can be for land use, it can be for preservation of conservation. Conservation or cluster development, that's a tool utilized. We don't have anything built into our zoning code, but Charleston County does. And so that allows a developer to concentrate development or cluster development and preserve more open space in different areas and conserve areas of land by essentially looking at which areas can be preserved in a larger massing scale. And so I won't go, like I said, I won't go through all of these, but I want to focus today on urban growth boundary. So that is a tool that's been used, as I mentioned, and that really just outlines a region that delineates two areas of development. So those that are rural from those that are suburban or urban. And what that does is allow local governments to make decisions to where infrastructure is most suitable because of the intensity and density of uses, and it helps us better long-range plan. So here is Charleston County's urban growth boundary. This was established in 1999. I know this is not a good visual view for you guys. I should have dropped down the screen. Picture, are you able to lower the big one? The urban growth boundary, it's outlined there in black. And what it essentially does is encapsulate most of where the city is. So the city of Charleston, the greater region starts at the peninsula and sort of flags out towards the North Charleston area and then along the beach communities. I'll pause here for a second so that. So the urban growth boundary essentially encapsulates the more developed areas, the municipalities within our region. That includes Kiowa and Seabrook. And you'll see in a few minutes, I'm going to show more specifically how the urban growth boundary relates to more proper our area of the town. Like I said, this line was established in 1999 as sort of a baseline, and it's adopted through the comprehensive plan of Charleston County. And so municipalities, Town of Mount Pleasant, City of Charleston have both utilized this as a tool to understand where development might occur. So if I continue, like I said, the areas outside of that urban growth boundary are identified by more rural areas, scenic areas, agricultural lands, low levels of infrastructure, and low intensity development. So these are the areas that those who make their approach typically to Kiowa drive right past. The undeveloped lands on Bohacket Road, those are much more lower lands, have been historically rural agricultural lands. And as you approach I'll show you in a minute where that actual line is. You had a question?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
If I heard you correctly, you're saying we are included in the rural growth boundary.
We are inside the urban growth boundary, yes.
So we have our own zoning, we are responsible for our own zoning.
Correct, so
We cannot, we have to stay with, we have to agree to what the limits are in the urban growth boundary?
So right now, and this is Charleston County's urban growth boundary. And so from a regional standpoint, it's best for that larger municipality jurisdiction to have that line because we have a much more narrow scope of area, right? So when you look at Charleston County, they're responsible for not only urban areas, but rural areas as well. And so what they want to do from a county standpoint is be able to manage areas that are much more intense in development versus areas that need to be preserved in more rural and ag nature. I don't know if is that.
Yeah, I'm just saying, so the primacy of this is Charleston County, and we have to, and our zoning has got to be inconsistent with the urban growth boundaries.
So this is, in theory, our zoning code does not have to, in application, it's best to align. But in theory, it could be different. The reason why I say it could be different, which is probably not in the best interest of either of us, is because then you create the terms of sprawl, where you see areas where just development happens any and everywhere of intense development, no matter whether or not infrastructure is there or not. So the areas within the urban growth boundary, like I said, are those areas that are suitable for development. They have the infrastructure in place for water and sewer. They have levels of medium to high density of development because that's where it's concentrated. So you think the peninsula of Charleston, where everything tends to occur for our region, and then you sort of flank outwards, and so that the areas that are more rural in the northern part of the county towards Allendale, McClellanville, that area, and then to the southern parts of our county, out towards parts of Johns Island, Guatemala, Ravenel, et cetera. Yeah. So really quickly, I'm going to just show you, because you guys drive River Road and Maybank Highway often, and so this is showing you exactly where that urban growth boundary line occurs, sort of as a relative to the northern part of Johns Island. So the purple line to the north of that is everything inside the urban growth boundary. Everything to the south of that is outside. So driving, if you are driving River Road back towards Charleston, on the right, you'll pass the airport. The areas to the airport on Johns Island, that's inside the urban growth boundary. And this sort of shaded color, it's really hard to kind of see on this map here, but the shaded color that's in a sort of a yellow hue there, that's everything within the city of Charleston's municipality. So to your question just a minute ago, Mr. Iwan, there are areas within this municipality that are outside of the urban growth boundary. If you talk to most folks, they probably said that probably would have been a mistake to annex outside the urban growth boundary, but this particular line would help delineate, okay, we want to intensify development on there or preserve particular areas outside of that. So if you drive River Road, Plow Ground Road, Bohicket Road, all of those areas that are primarily undeveloped or used for ag lands or rural residential, those are outside of the urban growth boundary. So let's bring it a little closer. As noted, these are the areas inside of the urban growth boundary. So as relative to Kiowa, the town, our municipal boundaries are inside. Seabrook, Freshfields Village, Bohicket Marina, all those future developments that we've heard about coming online in the near future, Seafields, MUSC, the Andale West, all those are within the urban growth boundary. And that line continues down Betsy Carrison Parkway, and then jogs back and sort of encapsulates Oak Point Golf Course, where Kiowa River is, as well as the newer development, Kiowa River, that's off of Betsy Carrison. And so it does this kind of funny jog to capture those. And everything you see here in the blue is the town of Kiowa. Everything in that sort of purple color is town of Seabrook. And so those two communities as a municipality are within the urban growth boundary. Yes.
How fluid are these lines?
It's a good question. So this line has been in place for quite some time. The county of Charleston County has made a decision or a policy that they would like to keep this line in place. It helps long-range planning that to jog this line, moving it every year, it does not make a whole lot of sense to continue to move that line. So Charleston County has been intent of keeping this line where it is. There's been a lot of advocacy from local residents in Johns Island, municipalities to support keeping this line in place so that we can, as a region, not just Charleston, but as a region, you look at, okay, these are areas that we can add more density. These are areas where we should not. And so that helps. So in order to adjust this line, that's to be done by ordinance to Charleston County. So that's essentially a public hearing and through our standard practice of going through the adoption process of planning commission, council readings. That's what, in order to move that line for the county, that's what would need to occur.
John, would Orange Tree, which is not on your list of new developments, but coming on soon, would that have to subscribe to the limitations on density and all of the other limitations with respect to the boundary?
So the urban growth boundary does not have a designation of density. It's just a designation of where density should occur. So the recommendation, let me say first, that's outside the urban growth boundary, just to number one, the property, if you are unfamiliar, the Orange Hill tract, that is where the current shooting club of the Kiowa Club, that property along Bohicket Road, that's outside.
Orange Tree is not?
No. So it's not. So here is, if you look here, here's River Road is not even shown on this exhibit here, but River Road would be a little bit further north. So it's not within.
Okay.
So does that mean they're limited in housing density that they can put there?
No, so that zoning is different from the urban growth boundary. So whatever is that property is zoned or whatever they desire to zone would not impact what the urban growth boundary is. What Charleston County staff will recommend will be based on the urban growth boundary. And so is it consistent with whatever the future land use designations are? So let me ask you to rephrase your question then to make sure I've answered it correctly. If you're asking whatever is developed on that property can be at a higher density, whether it's inside or outside?
Right, I guess if it's outside the urban growth boundary, okay, it's supposed to be more rural. Are there restrictions to number of houses per acre or?
So all of those restrictions would pertain to the actual zoning of that designation of that property. So whatever that property is zoned, that will be where those densities come into play. The urban growth boundary does not have a prescribed density. It's just a recommendation as far as what should be more intense versus less intense. So it's not saying that there's 4 units per acre versus 8 units per acre of inside or outside, but it does say that these areas should be more intense because it allows us, the infrastructure can support that.
So it has, the urban growth boundary really has no teeth to it, is what you're saying, it's recommendations.
It's a guideline?
It's a guideline, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a guideline, but I think the teeth comes into play of any from just me being on staff format with the county, you understand that if a recommendation comes forth, that staff will utilize that urban growth boundary and the comprehensive plan future land use designations as how they would determine whether or not it satisfies or meet the criteria for whatever is being proposed or recommended for rezoning. So today, those properties I think are zoned, don't quote me, but I think they're planned development, so that's a customized zoning. What that means is they've already designated what can occur on that property, absent of what the other areas around there might be zoned.
Because there are a lot of multifamily developments going up on Johns Island, and I think most of them are inside the urban growth boundary, but if somebody wanted to build one of those complexes outside the urban growth boundary, would they be less likely to get approval?
Correct. They would most likely be less likely to be approved because the zonings tend to differ based on that urban growth boundary line.
So again, going back, Orange Tree is not in the boundary,
Correct.
and there's no limit on what they can do?
There is a limit. They have, that particular property that you're referencing is a specific planned development. So what that means
All
is
right, so
they
it's-
customize whatever
It's got a
can occur.
PUD
Yeah.
designation, but if they didn't, could they build what they wanted to on that?
It would determine
area-
whatever it's zoned, so.
Whatever it's zoned for.
Wherever it's zoned. So if it's I'll give you an example, the area of Andale Tract, that's currently zone R4, which is 4 units per acre. That would be what's the allowed density that could be developed today. In order to change that, then they would need to go for a rezoning.
Okay. So to change the zoning, it would have to be either through annexation by the town or going to the county and have them change it.
Or,
Any property, for anybody outside of the county to change the designation in an area, either that they own or it's already annexed into a municipality or it's not, it would have to be, to change the zoning, it would have to go either to whatever entity owned or whatever entity was in a municipality.
yeah, so just let me give you the one example now today. The Andale West property that's not part of within the town's jurisdiction, they're going for rezoning right currently with Charleston County because it's outside of Charleston County. Yeah.
Okay.
So that sort of concludes my presentation. What I really wanted to kind of end with here is that this is an opportunity for the town to more regionally collaborate. How this line impacts Kiowa is that as we see more development pressures occur on our front areas, from a planning perspective, I would like to see that we sort of hardline that line so that line doesn't jog. If you imagine, because of what I did not kind of speak about, if you see Betsy Carson, that line jogs Betsy Carson. So on the western side of Betsy Carson towards the river, you're driving away from it. That's outside of the urban growth boundary. And on the left side is inside. So you can imagine that these areas could be developed totally different in the future, just based on if consistency occurs with the development, with the urban growth boundary. So from my perspective, what I've introduced to council, and we're working now to engage with Charleston County, is to introduce, let's do an overlay district for Betsy Carson Parkway, which would allow some consistency to occur based on those two dynamics there. So the urban growth boundary, I would say, as you talk to others in the community, let them know that the urban growth boundary is substantially important. We'll continue to push out information from the town of the importance of the urban growth boundary and what it means and how it impacts Kiowa. Because I go back to the beginning of how I mentioned growth management strategies. We can no longer just begin to focus on what's on island, but we have to be paying more attention to what occurs off island, if you will.
John, you just said that you're working with the county to make both sides of, do an overlay for both sides of Betsy Carson to be the same. Are we looking to make the side inside the urban growth boundary less dense, or are we looking to allow the side outside more dense?
So we're not looking to move the line. I want to clarify that.
No, but you say consistency, and inside the urban growth boundary, they have the right to do more density than outside. So when we say consistency, are we looking to the lower density side?
Yes, lower density side. So
Okay.
preserving what the character of Betsy Carson is today, where it's the only commercial that is on Betsy Carson. They are traditionally what I would identify as the mom and pop, the historical community commercial, and allowing that to be the sort of the only commercial that is identified on there. The idea was to be able to buffer Betsy Carson substantially so that even if development occurs, the development is pushed away from the right-of-way. And then finally, knowing that where commercial development can happen, which is already occurring, Freshfields or up on River, the intersection of River Road and Bohacket Road, where that, so we want on either two of those ends as opposed to just being a stretch of what you would see Folly Road now develop as. That's all.
Do we have, we can stay up there if you have any staff comments?
Yeah, so I just wanted to give just a couple highlights here. I want to keep, on next week, we'll have our second marsh management work group meeting. 3 priorities have been identified from that initial meeting with the work group. Those 3 priorities: number 1, to develop a comprehensive communication sort of plan, strategy, that we can really roll out everything that's a part of this marsh manage and educate the community, but also bring them an opportunity to understand how can they specifically apply whatever's outlet plan to their property. And so I think, Madeline, you're on that subgroup. I can't remember which subgroup, but really utilizing a breadth of strategies to how do we engage with the community to make sure in this implementation phase they're aware of the things that can. So what Lee and Lucas presented was one example of how we will do that. The second priority is looking at impervious versus pervious surfaces and what can be built into our zoning code, whether through regulation or through incentive. Those things are being evaluated now, but we felt that this was one ordinance that we can look at and focus on, that we could be able to identify, have some tangible fruit within a good time window before the end of the year. That was my goal, to have at least before the end of the year, or by our 1-year adoption date, which would be next February. So, and then the final one, which would be looking at the Kiowa River Bridge. If any of you paid attention to town council yesterday, Jim Jordan, during his update, gave a presentation on just a glimpse of what's being considered for the Kiowa Island Bridge in the areas of marsh connected to the bridge. Right now, we know that that's a public access. And so utilizing that as a public access, how do we manage that public access in the best way that allows the environment to still thrive?
Specifically about the parking area there
A parking area, correct.
and how they go down into.
And one thing that we should discuss, and Mike, I'd appreciate your input, the smaller work groups that have been established as part of the overall group, should we meet before the next meeting so that we have got something to report on?
Yes.
And who's the person who should initiate that? I mean, I'll take responsibility
Yeah,
from my
I've-
subgroup.
Before the 14th? No. I would suggest, you get the three primary starting points, right?
So
Have
the
we
the
agreed,
idea.
have we agreed on that as a group and who's going to do it and how it's going to be
Yeah,
done?
so that's been
Get
done.
that explanation. And then go forward, I think, and decide where we're going with the work groups and whether or not you're going to get a report from them or not.
So
be the
that's
next
already,
meeting.
that information has already been shared. I should have did a better job of communicating. You guys should be meeting prior to next week. That probably is not correct. Two of the three priorities have had a good amount of traction, so I'm not too worried that we won't have substantive things to discuss at our meeting. But I'll chat with you about the best way to do that before our next meeting.
We're going to include communication staff in our work on it.
I met with Erin.
Outreach.
I met with Erin this morning, so she's aware of our nuance. I didn't introduce you guys to Erin. For those
Right.
who have not met, I'm sorry. Erin is our new communications manager.
Welcome.
Anything else, Mike?
The only other update, Andale West, a waiver was granted by Charleston County Council at last evening's meeting. And so they essentially have 1 year waived so that they can submit a revised plan development application. And then the Andale West, they have, last night, the waiver request that was submitted by Riverstone, that just allows them to not have to wait 1 year to not have to wait 1 year. That was approved, yeah. And there's no updates on MERC. And then the other thing I'll let you all know, this month, April, we'll have our Planner One, Daniel Vincent, joining us to our planning department. So we'll have a new hire shortly.
His name?
Daniel, his name's Daniel. Yeah, comes from West Palm, Florida.
Tomorrow is the hearing.
Tomorrow is the hearing. You all should have been sent the credentials to access that, or at least how to access. If you have questions or issues trying to access, please let me know tonight so I can resend those out to you all if you want to tune into that tomorrow. I think that's at 10:30. You haven't gotten those? I'll resend them. Yeah, I'll resend them. Yeah. I think it's 10:30 tomorrow.
Starts at 10:30.
Yeah,
and
so
then
but
Could be any number.
yeah, several agenda items, so we don't know exactly the exact time, but
Where are we in the?
No, could be at the end.
yeah,
It depends on how significant he thinks it is.
yeah. They anticipate
she
at
or
least
whoever it is.
15.
So there is no agenda, she picks it.
Judge has her own, his or our schedule.
They've communicated at least to try to have these in 15-minute windows, but that's give or take, so we'll see. That's all.
That's a lot. Okay, I see we don't, no public comments, no public here. So we'll go to our council liaison. Michael, would you like to update us?
Yes, please. All right, couple of points really quick. We are making really good progress with a lot of the work groups that we installed during the retreat. We will most likely in the next 2 weeks have our first meeting for the ordinance review work group, where we will determine where we will start along the vast catalog of ordinances that we have. We will certainly do this in steps. I would envision that this probably takes at least for the rest of this year, probably even into 24. The planning ordinances will become part of that at some point. the meeting next week with us, with staff in particular, will help us to better determine when the planning ordinances will come into play. And then I would update you and also ask you for your participation, of course, in these reviews. The zoning ordinances are separate. That's John's project, and we carved that out, so to speak, as you know. One of the first things we will tackle is those kind of quick fixes. So things that we have realized over the last couple of months that needs to be changed or have been notified by community members that might have some inconsistencies or actually are unproductive the way they are defined right now. If you have any experiences from your time on this commission, of something that, you know, should be looked at, then I would like to ask you to please send me an email within the next week. You can just reference to the number or give me some background, but then those things are definitely the first ones we will tackle, no matter if it's planning or not. Okay? Second, you know, we had a second reading for the change in the notification ordinance. I know it's not the right word, but the ordinance that relates to who needs to be notified about changes, variance changes that are applied for. So this was approved. A big topic yesterday, of course, was the discussion that also partially then took place in executive session about the Kiowa Island real estate building, which we believe is very, very essential for us to have a better way of looking at the traffic situation at the first gate and the intersection between Kiowa Island Parkway and Beachwalker Drive. So acquiring at least the property, but okay, it comes with a building, gives us a lot more room to look at this, and might enable us, for example, to really look at a roundabout or other, you know, more sophisticated, you know, ways of routing traffic and maybe not entirely eliminating, but certainly easing the backups that we see usually in the morning between, you know, 7 and 10 probably, and in the afternoon between 3 and 5, whatever. So this is a really important step here. We have approved yesterday that we will work on a letter of intent, that we will update the appraisal that we have for the building and the property. And then when these things are done, we will start relatively quickly with community involvement, first with the neighboring HOAs and then with the broader community. And at some point you will be involved, of course, in this process as well, if it moves forward. We don't know that yet. Okay. Two topics out of you know, our own interest at the council that I want to mention, because I hope somebody is at least virtually with us here. As John mentioned, we want to push forward on the Kiowa Bridge, you know, review project. You know, what are we going to do at that part with the parking, and how much are we going to allow access to this, etc. So this will be an important topic on the agenda of the Environmental Committee next week, 14th, I believe. Anyway, next week, please look it up. So I would hope that there's you know, good community involvement. If also some of you have an interest in this, this is a very important part of our marsh management protection plan. And then we have, again, Andy, especially for you, our next drop-in meeting, because he was one of the people that made it to the last one. We have our next drop-in meeting for the community to ask questions and voice concerns to town council members on Friday this week from 9 to 11. It will this time feature Brad and me. And this time it will be in the Kika building. Originally, we wanted to do it in Sandcastle. They have some maintenance issues, so we moved it to the conference room in the Kika building. So I would love to see some of you, all of you, Andy, maybe again? No, I'm sorry. Maybe.
Maybe.
Okay, good. But thank you, that's it.
Depends on the weather.
Thank you, Mike. We'll have the call the roll for commissioners' comments. We'll start at the end. Ron?
Nothing to add.
Joanne?
Nothing.
Nothing?
I'm really excited that the town is proceeding to purchase the real estate building. I think that that makes a lot of sense to mitigate some of the traffic problems, and there's probably a lot more utility that can be used out of that property, that building. So that's probably the most exciting thing I've seen from the town in a long, long time. Thank you.
Thanks, Luke. And Andy?
No specific comments.
Okay, none from me either. So at this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting is